I mean, imagine the most powerful political figure in Europe, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The ultimate authority.
Yeah, a man who literally claims divine authority over kings and emperors. But he's sprinting through the dirt while local street gangs are just hurling rocks and arrows at him.
Right, from the top of the Colosseum, no less.
Exactly. It sounds like this, surreal fantasy movie, but it's actually just a snapshot of 13th century Rome.
Which is wild to think about.
It really is, because when we think about the concept of supreme power today, we usually expect, well, absolute clean control.
Very organized.
Right. You picture like a massive tech monopoly or a modern authoritarian state where a single figure issues a command and this massive hierarchy just snaps to attention.
It's visible, it's structured.
Yeah, exactly. But when you step into the actual mechanics of medieval history, that clean organizational chart is it's completely torn to shreds.
Oh, completely. The historical reality is incredibly murky. I mean, we tend to look back and categorize power really neatly.
Like, he's the boss. End of story.
Exactly. Assuming that if someone held the title of Pope or Emperor, they simply waved a hand and the whole world obeyed.
Right.
But diagnosing how a society actually functioned back then, it requires looking past those titles. You have to examine the gritty day-to-day survival tactics those leaders actually had to employ.
And that gritty reality is exactly our focus for today. So today is Monday, May 25, 2026, and we want to welcome you to this deep dive.
It's going to be a fascinating one.
Oh, for sure. We are exploring the violently turbulent world of 13th century Rome. And to do this, we're drawing our insights specifically from Ferdinand Gregorovius's classic historical text.
Right, his history of the city of Rome in the Middle Ages.
Exactly, and we are diving deep into Volume 5.
And Gregorovius's text is just incredibly rich because, well, it peels back the mythological holy layers of the papacy.
It gets right to the core of it.
Right, it shows us the raw mechanical gears of how power was actually maintained, bought, and defended during an era that fundamentally reshaped the Western world.
So our mission for you today is exactly that, to unpack the mechanics of medieval power through the meteoric rise of Pope Innocent III.
A truly pivotal figure.
We're going to explore how spiritual authority was literally bought with cold, hard cash, the deeply theatrical and, frankly, bizarre rituals of dominance.
Oh, the rituals are unbelievable.
Yeah, we'll get into that. Plus, literal turf wars fought on top of ancient Roman ruins and a grand geopolitical chess game that permanently altered the map of Europe.
All happening at once.
Right. We're talking about an era where the ancient Roman Empire has been gone for centuries, the old German Empire is starting to fracture, and out of this chaotic power vacuum steps a 37-year-old pope who basically decides to claim absolute world domination.
And 37 was incredibly young for a pope, you know.
Like millennial CEO young.
Exactly. He was born Lotario of the Conti family, and he was elected on January 8, 1198.
Okay.
But to understand the sheer scale of what he achieved, we have to look at the incredibly unstable world he just inherited.
Right. Set the stage for us.
Well, the 13th century was the absolute peak of the Middle Ages. You had Italian city-states fiercely fighting for civic independence against the old, entrenched feudal nobility.
So constant conflict.
Constant. It was an age of revolution, really. Citizens against nobles, emerging democracies against the old imperial monarchies.
Okay, let's unpack this, because Innocent III steps up to the papal throne right in the middle of all this chaos.
Right in the thick of it.
And you would think, being elected the Vicar of Christ, he just, walks into the Lateran Palace, puts on the crown, and everyone bows.
You would think so.
But, according to the sources, to secure his throne, he literally had to buy off the Roman citizens.
Yeah, literally paying them off.
He had to pay massive sums out of pocket, including a tribute of £5,000 just to the municipal government.
Which was an astronomical amount of money.
Oh, ahead. To put this in modern terms for anyone listening, this feels like a massive corporate merger.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. Like the new CEO takes over, but the shareholders, in this case, the volatile Roman public, are totally hostile.
Right, they are not happy.
So to stop them from literally burning down the corporate headquarters, he has to instantly pay out these exorbitant out-of-pocket dividends.
Just to keep his job.
Exactly. But how does a pope even get his hands on that kind of liquid capital? I mean, where is this money coming from?
Well, that is the crucial mechanical question. See, the church functioned somewhat like a multinational corporation.
Okay, right.
It collected tithes, donations, and land revenues from across all of Christendom, so from England, France, Spain.
So he had this global income stream.
Exactly. So Innocent had access to this vast international treasury. He essentially used international revenue to solve a local liquidity crisis.
Wow.
Because the citizens of Rome had recently formed an independent republic with its own senate, and they were notorious for extracting these massive payments from newly elected popes.
So it's just part of the process.
Pretty much. If you did not pay this tribute, your throne was at risk before you even sat on it. They would simply riot.
That totally shatters the illusion of unquestionable holy authority, doesn't it? I mean, the Pope is being escorted by his own local flock before he could even start ruling the rest of the world.
It really does. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it reveals the fundamental structural vulnerability of the papacy at that time.
Which was what, exactly?
Well, Innocent III was drafting letters claiming to be the supreme ruler of the world, but his practical physical safety rested on managing a highly volatile local democracy.
That is quite the paradox.
Yeah, he used this massive distribution of wealth, dispensing it with the magnificence of a grand lord, just to convince the Roman people to let him have a say in electing the city's senator.
So he was executing a leveraged buyout of his own capital city.
Exactly.
Okay, so he successfully bribes the hostile shareholders and secures his physical safety. But a bribe only buys temporary peace.
Right, doesn't last forever.
Exactly. If I am a Roman citizen and I just watched the supposed representative of God empty his wallet to save his own skin, doesn't that completely destroy his aura of divine power?
You would certainly think so.
Like, how does he convince the people he is actually untouchable after he just proved he can be extorted?
Well, he had to overwrite that memory with overwhelming spectacle. The theatricality of power in the Middle Ages was not just for show.
It was functional.
Absolutely. It was a vital tool of psychological governance.
Right.
Innocent needed to project unquestionable divine authority to legitimize his rule.
So how does he do that?
He did this through his coronation on February 27, 1198. He led this magnificent procession through Rome along the traditional route known as the Via Sacra.
And the visuals described in the sources are absolutely staggering.
Breathtaking, yeah.
Picture this. The Pope receives the regnum, right, the papal tiara, but it isn't just a heavy golden crown. Originally, this tiara was made of bright white peacock feathers. Later covered in glowing gems with a massive ruby at the top, he mounts a white horse draped in scarlet cloth.
Very dramatic.
Yeah. And to show you exactly where everyone stands in the pecking order, kings or the highest nobles are walking on the muddy ground, leading his horse by the reins.
Right. Every single detail was designed to visually communicate absolute, unshakable hierarchy.
It didn't leave anything to chance.
Not at all. The archdeacon places the tiara on his head and explicitly declares him the father of princes and kings, the ruler of the world.
Wow.
The procession included thousands of people moving like a glittering ghost through the crumbling ruins of ancient Rome.
What a visual.
Crossbearers, judges in long black robes, knights in shining armor displaying their family colors. But embedded in this massive display of wealth and order were rituals designed to establish narrative dominance.
Right. There are two bizarre rituals along this route that we really need to talk about.
Oh, definitely.
First, they reach the Parian quarter. The Jewish community, led by their rabbi, approaches the Pope, and they present him with the Pentateuch, the Torah.
Yes.
The Pope accepts the physical book, the law, but he publicly and loudly condemns their interpretation of it. He basically tells them, we honor the law, but condemn your mind.
It was a highly orchestrated ritual of submission. The Jewish community was forced to publicly acknowledge the Pope as their absolute territorial lord.
Just to stay in the city.
Exactly, to secure his tolerance for their continued presence in Rome. By accepting the book but rejecting their faith, the Pope was performing the Church's supremacy over all other historical narratives.
Dictating their reality right there in the street.
He dictated their legal standing right there in the street.
But the second ritual is the one I cannot get over.
The chair.
Yes. The procession finally arrives at the Lateran Palace. And this incredibly powerful man, who has just declared himself ruler of the world, adorned in gems and white peacock feathers,
Right.
is made to sit on a marble seat known as the Sella Stercoraria, the dung chair.
The dung chair, yeah.
I have to admit actual confusion here. Wait, so he sits on a literal pile of dung.
Well, a chair named after it.
Why? Is this his enemies finding a way to humiliate him, or is he doing this on purpose? That completely undermines the peacock feathers.
No, it was done entirely on purpose, and it is arguably one of the most fascinating psychological customs the Middle Ages produced.
Really?
Yeah, to the modern mind, it makes no sense to mix absolute supremacy with utter humiliation. But the medieval mind was obsessed with dualities.
Okay, how so?
As he sat on this dung chair, cardinals would physically lift him up, reciting from the scriptures. He raises the poor from the dust and the beggar from the dunghill.
So the most powerful man in Europe is essentially role-playing as a beggar pulled from the trap.
Exactly. Performing extreme humility was a way to immunize himself against accusations of greed.
Oh, that's clever.
Right. After being lifted from the dung chair, the Pope would grab handfuls of coins, gold, silver, and copper, and throw them to the roaring crowd, shouting the biblical phrase, "Silver and gold have I none, but what I have, I give to you."
Wait, silver and gold have I none, he shouts, while literally throwing handfuls of gold at people.
Literally throwing gold.
The paradox is just incredible.
But it worked beautifully on a psychological level. The ritual cemented the idea that his power didn't come from his earthly wealth.
Even though the Roman citizens knew perfectly well, he had just paid them a 5,000-pound bribe.
Exactly, they knew. But the ritual said his power came from a divine transformation. God raised him from the metaphorical dung to rule the world. They were performing the poverty of Christ while dripping in an unimaginable imperial wealth.
But all that theatrical humility could not mask the reality of his actual governance.
No, not for long.
Because almost immediately, Innocent engages in blatant nepotism, and this directly triggers a brutal civil war right in his own backyard.
Yeah, claiming poverty is a tough sell when you are aggressively enriching your own family members.
Right. So what happened?
Well, for all his global universal ambitions, Innocent was heavily entangled in local dynastic politics. He used church funds to massively elevate his own family, the Conti.
Of course.
He directed immense resources to his brother, Riccardo Conti, to build a towering, fortified structure in Rome known as the Torre de' Conti.
And he didn't stop at building towers. Innocent handed his brother the highly contested feudal lands of the Poli family.
Right, huge tracts of land.
He basically orchestrated a bailout for a bankrupt noble family just so he could legally transfer their massive, lucrative estates directly to his brother.
Which naturally enraged the Roman democratic faction.
I can imagine.
The citizens of Rome, who had been fighting for a secular, independent republic, saw the Pope treating the city's lands like his own personal family piggy bank.
So they pushed back.
Heavily. They were led by a man named Giovanni Capocci, an eloquent, fiery demagogue who rallied the citizens against this blatant papal overreach.
Here's where it gets really interesting. A fierce urban war breaks out from 1203 to 1204.
And it was brutal.
Right, and the battleground isn't some open field outside the city. It is the city of Rome itself. The rival noble families backing the Pope, or the Republic families like the Orsini, the Annibaldi, the Frangipani.
All the big names.
Yeah, they literally build makeshift wooden and brick fortresses on top of ancient Roman monuments. They use the Colosseum, the baths of Aemilius Paulus, and the ancient aqueducts as military bases.
Gregorovius paints a stunning picture of this. They were walling up the spaces between ancient marble columns with crude medieval brickwork.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, the Frangipani family turned the Colosseum into their own personal stronghold. When a papal ally tried to build a defensive tower nearby, the Frangipani rained down a storm of rocks and arrows from the upper tiers of the ancient amphitheater.
Just ask yourself to imagine modern politicians having a literal siege war from the rooftops of national monuments.
Right, it's so surreal.
Imagine rival political parties barricading themselves in the Lincoln Memorial or the Eiffel Tower, lobbing boulders at each other. It's urban warfare amidst the ruins of antiquity.
Daggers in the streets, towers burning.
Chains stretched across the alleys to block cavalry charges. It got so intensely dangerous that Innocent, the man who just declared himself the ruler of the world, actually had to flee Rome in fear for his life and hide in the town of Anagni.
Which proves how completely isolated his theoretical power was from his physical reality.
Totally disconnected.
He could dictate terms to the King of France, yet he was a hostage to the clashing jurisdictions of local street barons in his own neighborhood. I mean, he could hear the screaming and the crashing of stones against his own palace walls.
So how does a guy who gets chased out of town by local gangs actually win? Because he does win.
He does, yeah.
How does he flip the script on Giovanni Capocci and the Democratic faction?
He won through financial attrition. Innocent used the massive international wealth of the church to simply exhaust his local enemy.
Yeah, just outspent them.
Precisely. The Roman people eventually grew tired of the constant fighting. The violence was disrupting their trade, their food supplies, and their daily lives.
People just wanted peace.
Right. So Innocent brokered a peace deal, but he embedded a fatal legal concession into it. By 1205, he legally stripped the Roman commune of its right to independently elect its own senate.
Wow. He plays the ultimate long game. He outspends the rebellion, wears down their morale, and then legally rewrites their constitution, so he alone has the power to appoint the city's ruler.
Exactly.
He completely neutralizes the democratic threat.
After 5 agonizing years of street fights and political maneuvering, he finally subdued the capital. And by securing Rome, he established a stable, unshakable base of operations.
He no longer had to look over his shoulder at local street gangs.
Exactly.
And having finally suppressed the local uprisings, Innocent was freed up to unleash his true political genius on the international stage.
This is a huge turning point.
Right. This is where he pivots from a local turf war to a grand European chess game that fundamentally alters the borders of the continent.
This transition from local warlord to international kingmaker is where Innocent's legacy is truly cemented.
Right.
See, he took advantage of a massive power vacuum. The German Empire, which had historically been the greatest military threat to the papacy, was thrown into utter chaos following the sudden death of Emperor Henry VI.
And Henry VI leaves behind a widow and a 4-year-old toddler named Frederick,
Yes.
who is the heir to the Kingdom of Sicily down in the south. So Innocent steps in, becomes the legal guardian of this toddler, and protects him from rogue German barons like Mark Waldo trying to steal the kingdom.
Right, he secures the south, but that is just the southern front.
What's happening in the north?
Up in Germany, a massive succession crisis erupts for the imperial throne itself. To understand the German conflict, think of Germany at this time not as a unified country, but as a fractured patchwork of competing warlords and noble houses.
Got it.
2 main factions emerge to claim the throne. You have the Guelphs, who are backed by the English crown and elect a leader named Otto.
Okay, Otto.
On the other side, you have the Hohenstaufens, the established German imperial family who elect Philip of Swabia. Germany is immediately plunged into a devastating civil war.
And what does Innocent do?
He sits back in Rome, watches them bleed each other dry, and masterfully plays them against one another.
He decides to throw his immense weight behind Otto, the Guelph candidate.
Yes, he does.
But he doesn't do this out of the goodness of his heart or like shared religious value.
Oh, not at all. He backs Otto to extract a massive, unprecedented geopolitical concession. In 1201, Innocent leverages his support to make Otto sign the Treaty of Neuss.
And what did that treaty do?
In this legal document, Otto officially recognizes the vast territorial borders of the Papal States. He essentially signs away the empire's historical claims to huge swaths of central Italy, granting the church massive physical territory.
So he treats the papal endorsement like a bargaining chip in a modern geopolitical land swap.
That's exactly what it was.
But let me ask you this. By playing kingmaker, by pitting these secular emperors against each other and explicitly negotiating national borders, wasn't the Pope stepping way out of his spiritual lane?
What's fascinating here is Innocent's philosophical masterstroke. He didn't just step out of his lane, he completely redefined where the lanes were drawn to begin with.
Oh, really?
He flipped centuries of established historical precedent. For 400 years, ever since Charlemagne and his Carolingian dynasty united Europe, the emperors believed they were the ones who appointed popes.
The secular emperor was considered the ultimate authority.
Exactly.
The emperors thought the church worked for them.
Innocent establishes a radical new doctrine. He argues that the pope is the sun and the emperor is merely the moon.
The sun and the moon.
Right. The moon has no light of its own. It only reflects the light of the sun. Therefore, the secular empire derives its entire legitimacy, its light, from the church.
Oh, wow.
He claimed the absolute divine right to judge, examine, and install the emperor. He essentially argued that all political power ultimately flows from the papacy.
That is wild. He is looking at the most heavily armed warlords in Europe and telling them, you are only king because I allow you to reflect my light.
Pretty much.
And the craziest part is, it actually works. When Philip of Swabia is assassinated in 1208, Otto is left as the sole ruler.
Yes.
Otto comes to Rome in 1209 and is crowned emperor by Innocent. But then, in a classic historical plot twist, Otto immediately betrays the Pope.
Naturally. Once Otto has the crown securely on his head, he realizes he gave away far too much territory in the Treaty of Neuss, so he turns his army around and starts attacking the very papal states he had just sworn in writing to protect.
Endless betrayal.
Endless.
But what strikes me is that even military betrayal doesn't stop Innocent's momentum. His psychological grip on Europe was so strong that you have other royals, like King Peter of Aragon in Spain, voluntarily sailing to Rome.
Yes, Peter of Aragon.
Peter literally hands over his entire independent kingdom to the Pope, swears to be his feudal vassal, and promises to pay a massive yearly tribute, all just to get the Pope to officially crown him.
He gives away his country's sovereignty for the optics of papal approval.
It's unbelievable.
It perfectly illustrates the sheer, inescapable gravity Innocent had generated. Through a combination of financial leverage, legal maneuvering, and relentless ideological framing, he had transformed the papacy into the supreme feudal overlord of Europe.
The spiritual and the political were no longer separate spheres.
Not at all. Innocent fused them into a single, devastating weapon.
So what does this all mean? Why does this 13th century geopolitical chess match matter to you listening to this right now?
It's a great question.
Because whether you are navigating complex corporate politics, observing your local government, or making sense of global international news, the story of Innocent III reveals a fundamental, timeless truth about power. True power requires operating on multiple levels simultaneously.
Absolutely. You cannot just rely on a grand narrative or a fancy title. You have to manage the physical, gritty reality on the ground.
Right.
Innocent understood that you need the dazzling theoretical framework,
Yeah.
the sun and the moon doctrine, the peacock feathers, the claim to divine right.
Yeah.
But you also need to know how to fund a war and win a rock-throwing contest in the alleys of your own neighborhood.
He managed the chaotic physical street fights while meticulously crafting a grand, unshakable ideological narrative.
He really did.
He outspent his local enemies, and he outmaneuvered his international ones.
Oh.
But I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder, building on everything we've unpacked today.
Okay.
Innocent III successfully merged spiritual authority with ruthless territorial politics to create an unprecedented papal empire.
Very true.
But in doing so, by making the church behave exactly like a power-hungry secular state, trading land for endorsements and manipulating secessions, did he actually plant the seeds of the church's eventual downfall in secular politics?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
Right. By tying divine authority so closely to border disputes, treaties, and political maneuvering, did he inadvertently teach the emerging nations of Europe that the church wasn't a spiritual sanctuary above the fray, but just another political rival to be eventually conquered? When you look closely at the mechanics of history, the diagnosis is rarely clean. It is brilliantly, violently messy, something for you to mull over as you step back out into the modern world.